coming to the conclusion of the introduction to the davening. On page 25, the last thing we say is Rabbi Yishmael Omer. This is a Braisa, it's the opening of the Torah's Kohanim. This is the book of the rabbis on the Torah's Kohanim, on the Leviticus, and the third and central book in the Torah. And this is the introduction to that book. And this is the Braisa, so it's by learning this, we fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah every day. You have to study the Chumash from the Tanakh, the Bible. Then you have to study the Mishnah, which we just did, the 5th chapter, the entire chapter, and Zvachim, tractate Zvachim. And now, this is the opening of the third and central book in the Torah, the book of Leviticus. So by reading this Braisa, we fulfill the mitzvah of studying Gemara every day. Also, the reason this was chosen is because this is very central. The book of Leviticus is filled with mitzvahs and rules and laws that we learn from. These are the ways how we expound the Torah. These are the rules how we expound the Torah. And it's very important to understand that when Moshe gave us the Torah from Hashem, and word for word, the Torah was dictated by Hashem, and Hashem gave us the 613 mitzvot through Moshe. Also, simultaneously, Hashem also gave the oral Torah, the explanations, because the Torah is a closed book. If you just read the Torah, you have no clue. Torah doesn't tell us, how do you do a mitzvah? How do you put on tefillin? How do you do it? You have no idea. And the Jewish people didn't wait 2,000 years till the Gemara, till the Talmud to figure out how to do it. And they knew from day one. Moshe showed them, he demonstrated them. And that's why it's called Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, because it's meant to be taught and to be demonstrated live. The parent, the child, teacher to student, you show them how to do it. It's orally transmitted, and that's the best teacher. It's not book learning, book knowledge. This is real life learning, real life knowledge. This is how it's done. Follow me, watch me. This is how we do it, in all the details. So when the Gemara asks, in every mitzvah, how do we know this? It's not that the Gemara, we didn't know how to do it until the Gemara told us how to do it. Of course we knew. But we know that everything is in the Torah. The Torah was written very cryptically. Everything is hinted at in the Torah. Everything is in the Torah. So the question is, how do we, this that we're doing, because it's been transmitted orally from generation to generation, from the first generation on, what's the source in the Torah? Where do we see this in the Torah? The Torah doesn't say that. So how do we know that this is the way it's done? But everything is in the Torah. So how do you decode the Torah? And that's what Rabbi Yishmael is going to teach us. This is the Braisa is teaching us there are 13 rules. There are 13 principles, 13 rules how we derive something from the Torah. So when you come to a rabbi and you ask him a question, the rabbi can't just make something up. We're not asking the rabbi what his opinion is. With all due respect, I couldn't care less what the rabbi's opinion is. Even Moshe Rabbeinu's personal opinion, I'm sure it'll be fascinating and interesting, but that's not what the rabbi is about. You come to the rabbi and you ask him, what does the Torah say? What does Hashem say? Because we believe everything is in the Torah. Torah is the blueprint for all of reality. There's nothing that exists, nothing that happens, nothing that occurs unless it originates in the Torah. So the Torah has to shed light and guide us. So you come to the rabbi and say, what does the Torah say? Now it's not clear. How do I derive from what the Torah and the principles that we know in the Torah, how do we get there? So these are the rules how we're able to arrive and learn, decode the message. So the rabbi is someone who's trained. He believes, like the one who's questioning him and asking him, they both believe that Torah is divine, Torah is perfect, all the answers are there. It's only a question of decoding the message, how to find the message in the Torah, how to find the truth. It's not a subjective personal opinion, it's what's the objective truth, what is the divine opinion, what does Hashem say? And these are the codes, this is how we derive. 13 measures. Now, it's interesting that the 13 measures in the Torah, 13 rules by which we expound the Torah correspond to the 13 attributes of mercy, the divine attributes of mercy. And the Baal Shem Tov said that they parallel each other, they correspond to each other. Because these rules itself were received traditionally, orally. These rules are not stated in the Torah. The only exception is the first rule and the 13th rule. The first rule is Kal V'chomer. So we actually find the Kal V'chomer in the Torah. Where do we find the Kal V'chomer in the Torah? There are actually 10 Kal V'chomers in the Torah. One of the Kal V'chomers in the Torah is that when Miriam and Aaron complained to Hashem that they were upset at Moshe, that he separated from his wife Tzipporah, and they were upset, and Hashem responded to them very forcefully. He says, how dare you speak against my faithful servant Moshe? He's the most humble person that lived. And then Hashem says, so what's Miriam's punishment? So firstly, she became a leper. She was covered in leprosy. And then Hashem says, what would happen if a father would spit in his daughter? Father was upset at his daughter. She misbehaved, or she spoke inappropriately, and he spit at her. She would be so embarrassed, so ashamed, that she would leave the house for 7 days, like she would quarantine herself, isolate herself for 7 days. In other words, Hashem was saying, how much more so if you upset Hashem? Who's angry at you? Who's upset at you? Is that your father? Hashem is upset at you. By questioning Moshe, you were really questioning Hashem. You don't think I made a right decision by choosing Moshe, and you think Moshe is misbehaving and he's acting inappropriately? You think I don't know that? I mean, so really it was an insult to Hashem. You insulted Hashem. So when you insult the father, and the father spits at you, you isolate yourself for 7 days. If you insult Hashem, it should be at least twice as much, 14 days. And that's what happened. Miriam actually, but only for 7 days. Miriam was isolated, was outside of the camp for 7 days. And this we learn another principle, that whenever you learn a Kal V'chomer, the thing that teaches you, it can't be more than what teaches you. Kal V'chomer means that if this is true in a case which is less severe, and nevertheless this is the rule, how much more so in a case that's more severe, how much more so should have the same rule. But whatever is teaching you, it can't be more than that. Since we're learning from a human father who's insulted, and he spits on his daughter, and he's so upset, and she isolated for 7 days, how much more so Hashem? But the punishment is the same. The result is 7 days. For 7 days, she was isolated. Now, when Moshe prayed for his sister, the first word that he used was Kel. Kel is the first of the 13 attributes of mercy. It says Hashem, Hashem, Kel, Rachum, V'chanun. That's the first of the 13 attributes. How did Hashem respond? With a Kal V'chomer, the first of the 13 rules. So we see that the two are intertwined, that the two are connected, that the 13 attributes of mercy reveal the 13 rules in the Torah, and it also works in the reverse. The 13 rules of the Torah, each rule reveals something new in the Torah. Without that, I wouldn't know it. So each rule in the 13 rules that Rabbi Yishmael is giving us, each rule in the Torah is a revelation. It reveals something new information, a new law in the Torah. So by learning the Torah, you also reveal the 13 attributes of mercy. It works both ways. The 13 attributes of mercy reveal the 13 rules in the Torah. The 13 rules in the Torah, which is the foundation of the oral Torah. This is how we expound and learn and derive all the laws in the Torah based on these 13 rules. You reveal the Torah. Suddenly the Torah becomes open and revealed. Now I can understand the Torah and I can derive all the details and specifics and the rules and the laws. Exactly, now I know what the will of Hashem is specifically. So each rule is a revelation of the Torah, which reveals the 13 attributes of mercy. In simple words, by learning the Torah, learning the oral Torah, learning the Gemara, learning the oral Torah, you reveal the 13 attributes of mercy that literally, it draws down health, long life, success, physically, practically. It's a revelation. It draws down the 13 attributes of mercy. That's the power of the Torah. As it says in Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, that Hashem is our shepherd, and we are his pasture, Bashishanim. So the Gemara says Shishanim means Sheshanim. To those who learn the laws of the Torah, those who learn the Torah, so Hashem takes care of them and he pastures us and he's our shepherd. The Zohar says Shishanim is roses. A rose has 13 petals, 13 petaled rose. This refers to the 13 attributes of mercy. So by studying the Torah Sheshainim, you reveal the 13 attributes of mercy. And then Hashem gives us and provides for us and sustains us in a revealed way. Just like you revealed the Torah, which revealed the 13 attributes of mercy, that Hashem showers His infinite mercy on us, and our life suddenly becomes blessed on every level, physically and financially and practically and specifically. So that's the power of the 13 attributes of mercy and the 13 rules with which the Torah is derived. And this is the foundation of the oral Torah. So in the opening of Leviticus, before you're going to learn all these laws in the book of Leviticus and very intricate laws, first Rabbi Yishmael, this is the opening, gives us the foundation on which all these rules and laws are derived. Where do we derive it from? So we can understand why this was chosen. See, this is the opening of the book of Leviticus, which is all about the sacrifices and the prayers, the substitute for the sacrifice. So this is the best thing when we in the introduction to the prayer. This is part of the prayer, and we want to fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah. The best thing that we chose is the opening of the book of Leviticus, which is really the whole foundation of the whole oral Torah. The question is, why does he say Rabbi Yishmael Omer? Rabbi Yishmael Omer means there's an argument. If someone makes a statement, you say Omer. I should have said Omer Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael said, he's not arguing. Is anyone that argues that there aren't 13 rules? Rabbi Yishmael Omer Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael Omer. This is a classical question. Shalach HaKadosh asked this question. Okay, now let's start going through the 13 rules. Rule number 1, mikal v'chaymer. Kal means lenient, minor. Chaymer means strict, major. Mikal v'chaymer. And again, we find 10 kal v'chaymers in the Torah. And the reason why the rabbis spell out the 10 kal v'chaymers in the Torah, because the Rebbe explains, because each of these cases, it's actually a very inferior kal v'chaymer. Kal v'chaymer is like a logically compelling argument. If, in the lenient case, we're strict, how much more so in the more strict case, we surely have to be strict. Or vice versa. If, in the more stricter case, we're lenient, how much more so in the more lenient case, we also have to be lenient. You learn one leniency from the other or one strictness from the other. So it's a logical argument, logically compelling. Kal v'chaymer. You don't need to learn this from your teacher. This is something that's logical. It makes sense. Logic dictates. If this is a truth in a more lenient case, how much more so that this should be true in a more strict case? The first example in the Torah of a kal v'chaymer, when Yosef accused the brothers of stealing the cup. After they returned and they had a meal together, and then he loaded them up and they left to go back to the land of Israel in the famine, and then, of course, he stuffed the cup in Binyamin's bag, and then he stopped them, had them stop. He says, "Why did you steal the cup?" So how did the brothers answer? If the money that you gave us when they bought the first time, when they came the first time, and they bought the grain, all the grain they needed, and they paid for it, and nevertheless he returned all the money. When they took the bag, they came home, they realized that he put back all the money, he didn't take a dime. And when they came back the second time, they returned the money because they said it must have been a mistake. We want to pay for it. They didn't ask for any handout. So if the money that you gave us, a gift that we found legitimately, that you put in our bags, in our sacks, and nevertheless we returned it to you, we're so honest, you think we're going to steal a cup? Isn't that ridiculous? It's like a kal v'chaymer. If the money that we didn't have to return, we return. You think we would go steal something that doesn't belong to us? Your cup, your silver cup. But it's a faulty kal v'chaymer. Why is it a faulty kal v'chaymer? Because Binyamin wasn't there. The first time around, Binyamin stayed home. Yaakov didn't want to send him. And he refused to send him. Until Yehuda said, we're going to die. And I'll take responsibility for him. But he's not going to, he told us, don't return until you bring Binyamin with you. So the kal v'chaymer works for them. You're right. But how about Binyamin? And indeed, that's where they found the cup, in Binyamin's sack. Of course, he never stole it. Yosef put it there. But nevertheless, the logic is faulty. The logic is, okay, it doesn't prove, it proves that you didn't do it. And maybe your younger brother Binyamin, he didn't return any money, he wasn't there the first time around. But it's a kal v'chaymer. Then we find the kal v'chaymer, Hashem tells Moshe, go speak to Paro. Moshe says, if the Jewish people won't listen to me, here I'm telling the Jewish people you're about to be free and they can't listen. they're not listening. You expect Pari to listen to me? It's a Kal V'chomer. If, how much more so, if the Jewish people don't listen to me, how much more so the Pari is not listening to me? But it's a faulty Kal V'chomer. Why is it a faulty Kal V'chomer? Because there's a reason why the Jewish people are not listening to you. Even though you're telling them something wonderful, that they are going to be released and redeemed. Because they're overburdened, they're slaves, they're servants, they're overwhelmed, they just can't listen, they can't hear it. They're too subjugated, they're too oppressed. Pari is not oppressed. Pari is sitting in his palace. Maybe he could hear it. So it's a little faulty, it's not exactly so logically compelling. Even though this is a message for their benefit, for the Jewish people's benefit, and still they can't listen because they're just too oppressed. The life has been knocked out of them for the last 210 years, or 116 years, or 86 years. It doesn't sink in. But Pari, he's free, he's the king, maybe he will listen. Now, it is somewhat a little of a Kal V'chomer because the tribe of Levi did not have servitude. Pari let the tribe of Levi alone because they were the teachers. Even Pari understood that the priests and the teachers and the ministers, they have to be left alone to administer to their people. So they also didn't listen to Moshe. So, it's somewhat of a, and the Kal V'chomer by Hashem's Kal V'chomer. Hashem says, if a daughter insults her father, and her father spits at her, he's so angry at her, that she will have to leave the camp and go live in isolation for 7 days. How much more so if you insult Hashem, and Hashem is upset, surely you have to leave probably double, 14 days, 7. But the truth is, it's also a little of a faulty Kal V'chomer. Why is it a faulty Kal V'chomer? Because you can't compare Hashem to a father. How could you isolate? Hashem is everywhere. There's nowhere to go. What do you mean, leave the camp? You insulted Hashem, and Hashem is upset at you, so you're going to leave. You can't leave Hashem. So it's a little of a faulty logic, but it's nevertheless, it's one of the 10 Kal V'chomers that the Torah points out. Torah uses that logic to make an argument. So this is a Kal V'chomer. Then we have Gezeirah Shavah. Gezeirah in Hebrew means to cut. Like words, the letters and the words are cut in the same way, are shaped the same way. So if you find the Torah uses the same word in two different cases, it's like a code. It's coming to teach us. If it's the same cut, the same exact words used, it's a code. Now, it's not something you can do on your own, just because there's the same word here, the same word there. This is something you have to receive from your teachers, from Sinai, that this was written in the Torah. It's a code. It's to teach me something regarding another law where the Torah there uses the same word, so it's to teach me one from the other. For example, it says that you have to bring the daily sacrifice, and we read it, we learned it earlier, we say it every morning, you have to bring the daily sacrifice every day, b'moyadoi, in its proper time. Every day, without fail. Shabbos, Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, every day of the year, in the temple, they would open up with a morning sacrifice. One sheep was offered in the morning, and then they would, at the end of the day, in the mincha, the afternoon, they concluded the sacrifices with an afternoon sacrifice. And this overrides Shabbos. You're not allowed to take a life on Shabbos. You're not allowed to burn on Shabbos. This overrides Shabbos. Torah says, the same Hashem, same God who told you to keep Shabbos, tells you that it's a mitzvah, it's an obligation in the temple to offer the sacrifice. From this we learned is also, when it comes to the Paschal sacrifice, the Torah uses the exact same identical word, b'moyadoi. So from this we learn that the Paschal lamb overrides Shabbos. I wouldn't know it on my own. The daily sacrifice is a communal sacrifice. It's set every day. One sacrifice includes the whole community, represents the whole community. A Paschal lamb, yes, it was all brought at the same time, and the entire Jewish people were all present, but every Jew had to bring his own sacrifice, or every family, or every group. So it was like it was like a hybrid of a personal sacrifice, a communal sacrifice. It's not the same level as a daily sacrifice. So how do I know it overrides Shabbos? Maybe if the 14th of Nisan, if Pesach is Saturday night, and the afternoon before the Seder, you have to bring a Paschal sacrifice, maybe Shabbos not, you're not allowed to. How are you desecrating Shabbos? But we learn, since we have a Gezeirah Shavah, it's a code. It says by the daily sacrifice. And it says by the Paschal sacrifice. So just like the daily sacrifice overrides Shabbos, so from this we learn that the Pesach sacrifice also overrides Shabbos. So this is a Gezeirah Shavah. This is one example. There's hundreds of examples. Gezeirah Shavah is the same word, and it's a code. It's received from your tradition, from your Rebbe, from your teacher. This is a code to teach me that the same law that's stated in this case applies to the other case. And this also includes things that are similar like that. We have a concept of smuchin, hekish. You compare one thing to the other, or when things are next to each other. The Torah is coming to teach. When the Torah juxtaposes two halachas together, Torah is you learn one from the other. Like a good neighbor, you learn one from the other. So this is included in this concept of a Gezeirah Shavah. Okay, that's the second rule. The third rule is Binyan Av, which means a general principle. Binyan is like when you build, Av, like a father has children. What are children called in Hebrew? Ben, banim. Banim comes from the word building. They are built from their father. A ben is built from his father. So too, when you have a general principle, when you have a father who has children, is built from his father, like you build a general principle. The Torah speaks, gives us concrete examples. The Torah never speaks in the abstract. But the example the Torah gives becomes a principle. You know, in secular law, when you read law books, they start out with principles, abstract principles, and from there you work your way to the examples. In the Torah speaks concretely. You know, a bull will gore an ox, ox will gore another animal. And from this we learn, we built an Av, you built a principle, a general principle that incorporates, that's very broad, not just this example. It's like when you teach a child, you tell them 2 apples and 2 apples is 4 apples. Of course, a child understands 2 apples and 2 apples. But then from there you have to work to the principle that 2 plus 2 is 4. It's not only apples, you know. The young child doesn't yet get it. He understands 2 apples and 2 apples, 4 apples. And from this, it's not just apples, it's also chairs, it's tables, it's pens, anything. 2 candies and 2 candies. There's a principle, 2 plus 2 is 4. From the concrete, you work your way to the abstract, and you build a principle. So you have 2 types of principle. You have a principle mikasav echad, from 1 verse. And then you have Binyan Av, a principle which you derive from 2 verses. What's an example of a principle that comes from 1 verse? So it says, just like on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do work. And Yom Tov, you're not allowed to either do work. It's not the same severity and strictness of Shabbos. Shabbos, if you don't do work on Shabbos, you can get stoned. If you do it intentionally and there's no witnesses, your life gets cut off. And if you do it unintentionally, you have to bring a sin offering. Yom Tov, there's a prohibition. That's it. Except Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, your life gets cut off. You don't get stoned, but your life gets cut off. And if you do work on Yom Kippur, it's like Shabbos in that sense, you have to bring a sacrifice. Yom Kippur is once a year. It's very strict, the holiest day of the year. But Yom Tov, it's a prohibition. You get lashes, but there's no sacrifice, there's no death penalty involved in any way, shape, or form. Not in the hands of the court and not even in the hands of heaven. But you're not allowed to do work. Whatever you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, of course Yom Kippur. But the Torah says, when it comes to Pesach, the Torah says that there is an exception. The Torah says that you're allowed to do work for yourself. Whatever you need to eat for yourself, whatever you need, the work that you need, you're doing for your own nefesh, for your own self, that exclusively, that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. You're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. You get stoned if you cook on Shabbos. But on Yom Tov, I'm allowed to carry, I'm allowed to cook. Anything that you're doing for your own personal benefit, you're allowed to do. That's the exception. In general, you're not allowed to do work, but whatever you do for your own personal benefit, you're allowed to do. So that becomes a principle that's applied to all the holidays, even though the Torah only spells it out on Pesach. But the Torah is giving us a principle that the prohibition of working on Yom Tov, in general, is work with the exception of if you're working for your own personal benefit. If it's work that you personally benefit from it, like cooking, in order you should eat a fresh meal, or baking, or cooking, or carrying, that you're allowed to do. And that's not only true in Pesach, it's true in Shavuos, it's true in Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, Rosh Hashanah. Because Yom Kippur you can, because Yom Kippur you're not allowed to eat, so it doesn't apply to Yom Kippur, but it applies to all the holidays. So that's an example of a principle that you derive from one verse. It says it once, and this becomes already a whole principle that's applied across the board for all the holidays. Some argue with this, and they say this makes no sense. This is not a good example, because this is not the principle of one verse is teaching me a principle. The Torah says I'm allowed to work. It's not called work. So it's not I'm learning this principle, this becomes a whole new principle. It's not a whole new principle. Torah states explicitly. So what difference is there between, just like on Pesach, the Torah allows you for that same reason, it should be allowed on Shavuos and Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres and Rosh Hashanah. Why should it be any different? It's not one of the 13 rules. I don't need a special rule to be able to learn that law. It's obvious. There's no difference between Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot. Rather, they say that the example that's given actually in Teres Kainim is not this example. The example that's given in Teres Kainim is that it's a little intricate, but it says in the Torah that if a zav, someone who has a male who has gonorrhea, for example, a certain flow or it's unnatural, and that creates impurity, that makes him impure. So if he leans on a bed, it's called a mishkav, something that's designated to sleep on, or if he leans with most of his strength on a moishav, a place, a chair that's designated, a bench that's designated to sit, so that in turn, now that bed, if he leans on it or he hangs on it, if he does his pull-ups on it, hanging on the bed or on the chair, now that becomes a source of impurity that anyone who's touching or carrying or touching, even touching this bed and this chair, which the impure person was leaning on and hanging on, now that becomes a source of impurity that anyone that touches it or carries it, not only does he become impure, any garments or clothes or any utensil that he's touching at that time also becomes impure. So here we have, it's basically two verses, a bed and a chair, a place to sit and a place that's used to sleep. Why does the Torah have to give me both? Because I wouldn't know one without the other. If the Torah would have told me only a bed, I would say only a bed. When the person who has gonorrhea leans on it, and leans most of his body on it, now that bed becomes a source of impurity. So any pure person who touches this bed now, he becomes impure, and all the garments that he's wearing, any utensil that he's touching also becomes. But not a chair, only a bed. If the Torah would only tell me a chair, I would say only a chair, not a bed. So the Torah tells me a chair and a bed, and this becomes a principle that anything that is designated, either a bed or a chair, if the person who's impure leans on it, it becomes, that in turn also becomes now impure. Not only does it become impure, it becomes a source of impurity that could contaminate a person and also the garments that the person is touching at the time or wearing at the time, or if he carries it. And this excludes, what does it come to exclude? A chariot, like a wagon. A chariot is not a bed, you don't use it to sleep, and it's not a chair. Now it's true, a person could sit on a chariot, but a chariot is different because a chariot you can use to carry things, to transport things, to move things around. It's not unique, it's not designated for a human to sit or a human to lie down on or to sit down on. It could be used for that, but it also could be used to carry things, to transport things. So there, the law does not apply. If someone who has gonorrhea, who has a secretion, which makes him impure, and when he leans on the chariot, so the chariot now becomes a source of impurity, but only if someone carries this chariot. If someone carries the chariot, then the pure person who carries the chariot now also becomes impure, and any clothes that he's wearing also becomes impure. But if he just touches the chariot, he becomes impure, but not the clothes that he's wearing or any utensil that he's touching at the time. So these rules, these principles, he's referring to one principle that's based on one verse, because both of these things are in the same verse. The Torah spells out a bed, mishkav, and moishav, and a chair. And from this we derive one principle, that something that's unique to humans, that's unique to the person. The bed is designated for a person to sleep on, exclusively, and a chair is designated for a person to sit on, exclusively. It's exclusively for a human. Versus a chariot is not exclusively for a human usage. It can be used for a human to transport yourself. It could also be used to move things, to transport things, to move things, items, not just you. So therefore, that's not part of that principle. So this becomes a principle, that anything that's unique to a human, it could be a sandal, anything that's unique to a human, then if you lean most of your weight and most of your strength on that sandal, now the sandal becomes impure. And if you were to touch the sandal, a pure person was to touch that sandal that became impure, not only do you become impure, but the clothes that you're wearing and any utensil you're touching at that time also becomes impure. But it's only a sandal, which is similar to this principle because it's unique to a human. It's meant for a human to wear. Versus a chariot is not unique for a human. Yes, a human could use it to be transported, but it could also be used to move objects. So that's the first example that he means. A principle that comes from one verse. But again, it's not something that I would derive automatically. It's something that's from the principle. Since the Torah is giving me these two examples of the bed and the chair. So from this I make a principle that anything that's unique for human purpose, a chair or a bed or a sandal, and you lean on it. That's like when you sit your body on it, and when you lie down, your whole body is lying down on it. A sandal, your whole weight is on that sandal. So anything, that becomes a principle, that anything that's unique for a human, it's exclusively for a human, and it's something that's meant to carry the whole person. So then when the impure person leans on it, it becomes impure. That sandal, that bed, that chair becomes impure, becomes a source of impurity. Not only becomes impure, it becomes a source of impurity, then in turn imparts impurity even to a human being who touches it, and all the clothes that the human being is wearing. Even if the clothes did not come in contact with the sandal, with the bed, or with the chair, but you were wearing it while you touched it. And this is only true, this principle only applies if it's similar to both the chair and the bed. Something that's unique for human versus a chariot is not unique for human transportation. It can be used to transport objects. There, the law is different. The chariot becomes a source of impurity, but not to the extent that if a pure person will touch the chariot, he will become impure, but not his garment, and not any utensil that he's touching at the same time that he's touching the chariot. But when he carries it, yes, that's different. When he carries the chariot, then even the clothes that he's wearing at the time, or any utensil, now also becomes impure. So that's the example.